Chapter 3. The Exhibition Match. After a few days to rest and prepare themselves as best as they could for a long fight, Joe, Jen, Sarah, and Tucker met up at Joe's house and then took the bus to the nearby town center. Across from the spacious mall, the focal point of the area, was a building nearly half as large. It had been under construction for almost a year and had been dubbed the Mega Dojo, a place for soul fighters from all over the area to come together and train together and have heart-to-hearts, without any risk to themselves or others, even more so than at the designated fight zones around the city. Joe often thought of it as the soul equivalent of one of those corporate super gyms. While the idea behind it was a good one in principle, after the first month that it was open, the place was going to start charging membership fees to anyone who took classes there. Joe didn't like the idea of corporatizing soul that way. Joe had much the same attitude towards soul as her mother did, that soul was a form of self-expression before anything else. After all, the form of a person's soul when it awakens is always meaningful to the person. She was worried that as the mega dojos spread across the country, it would lead to a generation of fighters with no individuality or personal pride. As the four dueling hearts approached the front of the huge red brick building and the massive sliding doors dead center of the facade, the others began to mirror Joe's train of thought. "You know," Jen said, placing her hands firmly on her hips, "I like the idea of everyone who wants one having a place to train, aside from that nasty park. I'm not really sure that I like how the management here is going about it." She put her hands behind her back as the lacy skirt that she wore over her black yoga pants didn't have pockets, and assessed the place critically. Between the skirt and the loose mesh shirt that she wore over her black sports bra, Joe, and not for the first time, admired how her cousin could preserve her goth style and still dress in a way that didn't impede her ability to fight. "I'm with you there," Sarah, wearing another of her yellow jerseys, agreed, frowning up at the word Mega Dojo with a grand opening banner hanging from it. "The name alone is almost too stupid for me to take this place seriously." "I love it," Tucker exclaimed, grinning excitedly. His eyes darted between the building itself and the crowd forming in front of it, awaiting the grand opening ceremony. He wore the same tank and shorts that he had been wearing at the park. Looking at her, you might think that Joe was wearing the same clothing as she had that day as well, just in a different combination. She wore a pair of sweats that were very similar to the black sweats that she had worn to fight Keith, and an identical white t-shirt to the one that she'd put on after getting home. Like Jen, she'd even chosen to come wearing something that represented her own personal style, if you could call it that, the same old and worn overshirt that she'd worn that evening to training. She was about to chime in with her own thoughts regarding the place when she noticed that a group of men were in the process of wheeling a podium in front of the entrance. "Shh," she told the others. "Something's about to happen." A stout man with a balding head, bushy mustache, and too small suit stepped up behind the podium. He cleared his throat into his microphone, and what conversation was still going on in the Mega Dojo's lot died down immediately. The man began to speak, and while he sounded kindly enough, Joe detected an air of pretentiousness in the tone of the guy's voice. "Welcome, one and all," the man began, "to the grand opening of the country's first Mega Dojo, brought to you by the Prometheus Corporation. Ever since the discovery of Soul 30 years ago," he explained, "fighters from all around the world have been developing their skills and competing against each other. These heart-to-heart competitions have changed the world, expanding the lives of all who participate. And yet such competitions are dangerous. Many potential fighters always thought that unlocking the powers of their soul was too risky a dream. Here at the Mega Dojo and at all similar installations soon to be opening nationwide, we hope to change that. We will offer easy-to-follow training in martial arts, guaranteed to get real results for anyone who puts in the time, while providing our patented, supervised, state-of-the-art, heart-to-heart arenas to help make heart-to-hearts safer. To celebrate the grand opening," the man announced, "the Mega Dojo has decided to host an exhibition match to demonstrate our new technology and to demonstrate the kind of exciting competition that one can expect to see here every day. It will be a teams match between a team created by a local fighter, chosen by sweepstakes, and regional champions, Team Beatdown." There was applause throughout the crowd at the utterance of the name of the champion team. It seemed that the only spectators who didn't clap were Joe and her dueling hearts, and Team Beatdown themselves. "They didn't mention us by name," Sarah complained. "I thought you didn't like the name Dueling Hearts," Joe chided. Sarah harumphed and refused to meet her sister's gaze. Joe, chuckling, took a look around. She had been looking forward to this, a chance to test herself against a professional team of real soul fighters. She didn't really follow Team Beatdown, but she recognized them when she saw them, and not just from their logo of an open palm behind a closed fist that each of them wore in a bandana around their arms. They were standing about 25 feet away, also watching the stout man's speech. All four were male, and one was tall and gangly, much like Tucker, with hair like Hugh Jackman in those comic book movies. He had a permanent, arrogant smirk marring his face. The second and third members were about Joe's height, maybe a couple inches taller. One of them had dark hair and a slimmer physique than Joe would have expected from a pro fighter. The other had medium-length blonde hair and seemed generally unassuming. It was the fourth member, however, who really caught Joe's eye. Joe did recognize this guy from fights that she'd seen. He was Christopher Johnson, a guy about Joe's age who had grown up not too far away, further into the city. He was a fighting genius, who used his soul to create a near-perfect defense in battle. In a way, Joe's secret technique had been created specifically to give her a chance of getting inside this guy's guard. Even considering her new technique, though, Joe got the distinct sense that she would not be able to defeat Christopher Johnson, that no one on her team could, and that Team Dueling Hearts had no option other than to lose. It was at that moment when the crowd started pouring into the large building that housed the Mega Dojo. Joe had been so fixated on sizing up the competition that she'd missed the rest of the grand opening presentation. Oh well, she thought, that dude wasn't saying anything interesting anyway. She was about to join the rest of the crowd and head inside when she felt attention being directed toward her. Almost tangible sensation, and locked eyes with Christopher Johnson. The pro was sizing Joe up in turn. She smiled again, put her hands casually in her sweat pockets, and walked away. This match was going to be one to remember. The inside of the Mega Dojo was even more lavish and impressive than the Dueling Hearts had expected. Tucker was enamored with the place, grinning like an idiot at everything, while Jen and Sarah gave the place involuntary nods. Even Joe was starting to appreciate the place just a little bit. The interior was essentially one huge room. Mats were set up at intervals across the spacious floor, with enough room for groups of people 5 wide to walk between them. There were seats and food courts near the back right of the room, workout equipment lining the walls, and smack dab in the middle of the back half of the room was a raised arena, large enough for probably 6 people to fight at once. 3 bleachers 4 rows high surrounded 3 of the arena's 4 sides. "Look at these machines over here," Tucker said excitedly, pointing out a row of DDR-like platforms along the left wall. "I think they measure your soul's energy." "I've heard of those," Jen told him. "They're common in Japan, but they don't really work. And we can measure our own soul against ourselves and others better than any machine ever could." Tucker pouted, but his friends ignored him. All around them, people were spreading out and investigating the amenities that the Mega Dojo had to offer, or simply heading to the back of the room to take their seats and wait for the exhibition match to begin. Joe scanned the crowd, and she saw Team Beatdown already standing beside the arena waiting. "Come on," Joe told the other Dueling Hearts. "You have a fight to fight in." She started walking through the crowd towards the back of the room. The others kept pace with her easily. "So what exactly are our chances of winning this thing?" Sarah asked her sister as they walked. Joe looked again at the seemingly unimposing Christopher Johnson, and once again, despite the young man's almost average appearance, she got the sense that her team had no other option except to lose. "About 0%, Joe answered. Sarah frowned. "Yeah, that's what I thought." They arrived at the arena just as the same stout man from outside stepped up between the 2 waiting teams. He had a microphone in his hand. A quick announcement later, the crowd on the Mega Dojo floor cleared, filing into and filling the seats. Suddenly, more than 100 eyes were on the Dueling Hearts, and they weren't sure how to feel about it. "For those who do not know the rules of Team Heart-to-Hearts," the stout man began, "allow me to explain them to you now. Not all Heart-to-Hearts are fought with teams, or even in pairs, but these are the rules for this particular form of competition. Each team must decide ahead of time what order they will send their fighters in to fight, and then make that order official by taking their places in boxes, marked on the floor in each team's area, numbered 1 through 4. He gestured to an area on the floor near Joe's feet. Joe nodded to the others. They had gone over their fighting order several times since signing up. Jen stepped inside the box numbered 1, Tucker stepped into the box numbered 2, Sarah into the box numbered 3, and Joe into the final box, marked with a 4. "Each team," the stout man continued, "will send 1 fighter into the arena at a time. The fights will occur 1-on-1, and will continue until 1 fighter is either knocked from the arena, remains down for a count of 10 seconds, or surrenders. The winner will remain to fight the next in line on the opposing team, and things will continue in this manner until all fighters on one side have been defeated." His tone grew momentarily grave. "Obviously, attacking with lethal force or with the apparent intention to permanently maim the opposing fighter will not be allowed and will result in disqualification of both yourself and the rest of your team. I will be acting as referee to ensure that this rule is upheld." Then the man's voice became cheery again. "To ensure the safety of our wonderful spectators, a new technology has been employed in the construction of this particular arena. In a regular heart-to-heart, energy from the participants' souls charges the area, alerting other fighters that they should stay clear until the matter is settled. The Mega Dojo's patented arena will harness that energy once the fighting begins to create a barrier between the arena and the rest of the room so that no stray soul energy can escape." The crowd of spectators murmured their approval of this, and even Jo found herself impressed. The stout man waited for the murmuring to die down, and then he continued yet again. "Now," he said finally, "if the fighters from each team would please step up onto the arena, we will begin the match right away." Jen walked calmly and deliberately forward, climbing a short set of stairs the 4 feet to the arena floor. Her opponent, the tallest member of Team Beatdown, leaped up into the arena, ignoring the stairs completely. The two walked toward each other until they were both standing in the center of the arena, only about 6 feet apart. Jen took up a stance that kept her arms tight to her body, but her legs wide. Her opponent just cracked his knuckles and grinned wildly. Lights descended from the ceiling above each of the arena's 4 corners, pointing in towards the impending action. The floor beneath both waiting teams and the stout man rose up until it was level with the arena itself, and the stout man declared, "Jen of Team Dueling Hearts versus James of Team Beatdown. Let the heart-to-heart begin." Jen was the first to make her move. She banked left, circling James. He turned to follow her movements, but just as he did, Jen's feet were wrapped in a soft purple glow, and she vanished completely from her opponent's field of vision. The crowd gasped, and some spectators even cheered. James looked surprised. His eyes darted around trying to locate Jen before she could blindside him with a surprise attack. He didn't find her, but he did get a glimpse of where the spectators were looking, just above his head. He looked up quickly, just in time to see Jen dropping toward him, her right foot outstretched. James lunged forward and rolled, avoiding Jen's dropkick by a hair. He sprung back to his feet and turned, expecting to see Jen fall hard and maybe even hurt herself. But to his surprise, she fell to the floor far too softly. It took a second, but then realization hit him. He laughed. "Oh, I see. You're already using soul right out of the gate. Let me guess, you can make yourself lighter, right?" He was satisfied to see a begrudging agreement on his opponent's face, and he laughed again. "That's pretty good. But if you have to use soul this early just to give yourself a shot, then you really aren't cut out for a match at this level. I was able to dodge your best move without cranking up my soul at all. Want to see what happens when I do?" His sneer returned, and static ran up and down his entire body. His muscles twitched, and then they bulged. His body expanded until he was 50% larger than he'd already been, then 80%, then 90%. He didn't stop growing larger until he was more than twice his original height, and nearly 3 times his original bulk. In seconds, he had a physique that a bodybuilder could only dream of, energy crackling along the lengths of his muscles from head to toe. He flexed his arms, and the air around him churned. Jo and the other dueling hearts standing on the sidelines could feel that, as much as James had grown in size, his energy had grown even more. They weren't skilled enough at sensing things with their soul yet to tell by how much, but they knew it was a lot, and they knew that Jen would be able to sense it as well. And yet, the entire time, Jen hardly even shifted position. She moved her feet a bit as if trying to decide on a stance, but otherwise she held her ground. James laughed again. "So, do you want to surrender, or should I punch your lights out?" "I don't mind either way." Jen let out a sigh. "Just come at me already." James shrugged, but he obliged. He took his first step toward Jen, but as he did, Jen kicked the ground, scraping her toes along the arena floor in James's direction. "Gravity sigil," she muttered, and a circular sigil etched out of the same purple light that had wrapped her feet earlier flashed into existence below her. It was obvious now that all of her unusual footwork had been to draw this, which slid along the ground, stopping just beneath James where it spread out, growing more complex as it tripled in size. James found himself wrapped in that soft purple light, and his entire body grew almost unbearably heavy. He gasped and dropped painfully to his knees, and no matter how hard he struggled, he wasn't able to stand up again. Meanwhile, Jen approached him calmly. Her entire body became wrapped in purple light, and she stepped onto the sigil as well, completely ignoring its effects. "You assumed that I could only affect myself," Jen told James, "and that I could only make things lighter. You never even considered that I could affect you and that I could make you heavier. If you had, you never would have made yourself so massive. But worst of all, you assumed that that dropkick was my best." James ignored her, continuing to struggle, right up to the moment that Jen sprung up and kicked him in the jaw. He fell over sideways, hitting the ground within the sigil of increased gravity with enough force to shake the arena. His eyes rolled back in his head as he passed out. Jen's sigil disappeared, and the energy surrounding her body faded as James's body shrunk back to normal. The entire crowd was silent. They had been sure that James had won the moment he bulked himself up, but Jen had proven them wrong. Even the stout man seemed speechless. It took him a full second to begin the count. James showed no sign of rising as the count reached 10, and a pair of Mega Dojo employees ran up onto the arena floor to carry his unconscious body away. As it finally sunk in that Jen, an amateur, had soundly defeated a pro in only a few minutes, the spectators erupted in cheering and applause. But Jen barely noticed. Instead, she watched as the next beatdown member made his way into the arena. He was the one that Joe had taken notice of earlier for being unexpectedly thin, and yet despite what he'd seen Jen do, and his apparent lack of physical strength, he didn't seem concerned at all. "After a stunning upset victory by Jen of Team Dueling Hearts," the stout man announced, "Mike of Team Beatdown steps up to take his comrade's place. Will he be able to get revenge for James's defeat?" He waited a beat for the crowd to consider the question, and then announced, "Jen versus Mike. Let the heart-to-heart begin."